Right, welcome to Wortley Hall. And this just through here is the walled garden, which has been a kitchen garden since at least the 1790s. Although us as Heeley City Farm have only been using it since 2004. As you can see, it's a walled garden. The walls are original. We've been spending a lot of time restoring them. And there's about 3 acres of land in here. There's a north garden, which we're going to look at in a moment. There's a south garden on the other side. So if we come in a little bit closer at the garden. So the city farm's got several sites that are satellite sites away from the actual city farm site itself. Obviously, there's not a lot of land in the inner city area like where the farm is. So we've got gardens all across Sheffield area, including this one, which is the largest site. And we negotiated this from Wortley Hall, which is a trade union run conference centre, wedding venue, hotel. We supply some of the produce to them. The rest of the produce mainly goes to local shops to Sheffield and a box scheme. We've been doing that since 2004. We've got organic certification. So what I'm going to show you is how we grow the crops that we grow organically as part of the theme of the tour. We're certified with the Soil Association, so although people might think doing this thing or that thing is organic, when it comes to being a licensed grower, there's a very specific set of things you do and you don't do that may not be quite what tallies with books that call themselves organic gardening books. So we might touch on some of that as we go around. So we're in the northeast section of the garden here. This is the largest area that's just for vegetable production. Well, there's a few plum trees on the west-facing wall there. And what you'll see is some crops growing now, just getting established. So we've got dwarf French beans here. These will be like those fine beans, the very thin, dark green beans. They're very popular. They're a pain to pick because you have to bend down and pick them. So not the volunteers or staff's favourite job, but they do produce a really lovely crop. And then further in the distance, we've just started some climbing beans on those wigwam structures over there. We don't do many of those because most of those are growing inside the polytunnel and they're well on their way now. And then the bare ground in front here is going to have more dwarf beans. But of course, we don't want to grow everything all at once, both in terms of having produce available for the market. So these will be ready quite soon. And then we'll have more beans in this area here going later into August, September. So that would be described as successional planting. So making sure you've got a supply through the season. And therefore, what you'll see through the garden is some bare patches and also patches of land where we've got what people call mypex, or it's a woven polypropylene sheeting. It allows water through, but it obstructs light so that all the weeds that are under here are dying now without using any chemical weed killer or ploughing for that matter. So it leaves the ground fairly clean after we've left it long enough to kill the grass and the docks and dandelions and other weeds off. You'll see that that area there had crops through the winter, so we're just making sure it's clean of grass and other perennial weeds. And then later into the summer, early autumn, that will get planted up with crops to harvest and go through the winter. And further along here, we're still killing off grass that's got in through a very wet winter. So a wet winter tends to lead to lots of grass taking over in our beds. This had kale and cabbages growing here through the winter. The last harvest was around March. So we've covered it up. The grass is dying off. See it sort of yellowing off now under there. So that's good, because what we're going to continue doing is like we've done here this week, which is start to plant leeks along here. So first strip of leeks have been planted up here on Tuesday. The next strip's just being prepared now. I've just been rotivating this soil, having got the last few bits of weeds out of it. And that's ready to plant leeks as soon as we get the next of these sheets down here. So this garden was left unused for about 60 years. Basically, it was cultivated during the Second World War. Just a head gardener and his son, and 2 German prisoners of war that were conscripts and were gardeners. they came and helped out while they were in the prison camp just across the way, across the fields there. And so it's been abandoned for many, many decades, and that means there's a huge burden of weed seed in the ground. So we're always battling with weeds here. And as I say, you get a wet autumn or any period of wet weather, you're going to make it very hard to weed, and so therefore the seeds set and we get more weeds. So materials like this work for us really well. So this material here is usually called biodegradable mulch or biomulch. It feels like black bin liner plastic. It's actually made from genetically modified free cornstarch. So it's totally biodegradable, and it means that we can stretch it over a piece of ground, put holes in it wherever we want to put seedlings in, like leeks. We do a lot of lettuce and onions and garlic through it as well. Especially plants like leeks, where they've got very thin leaves, they cast very little shade over themselves and over the area where they're growing. So that invites weeds to really take over. And lots of the weeds that grow here grow faster than leeks do when they're babies. So they just take over. Or you spend hour after hour of weeding. And this works any scale. So say you've got a small raised bed in a garden or an allotment, you can use something similar to this material. Just stretch it round, bury the sides of it with soil and punch holes. Even use a trowel, a narrow trowel, just to make holes in it and put seedlings in. We've done that with cabbages before. Really, really cheap version of doing this without plastic is newspaper. You can literally just maybe about 3 ply of newspaper, small sections, or I asked about this recently. Yorkshire Post and Daily Telegraph are both still broadsheets, so they make a nice big square area rather than a tabloid like the Metro or something. You can put that in the ground, bury the sides, make holes through it, put your seedlings in, and then because it's paper, it's sort of prone to drying out and or raining on it and then blowing away. What you usually do then would be to mulch it with something like grass clippings. So if you've got a lawn, or a neighbour's got a lawn, you can get some grass clippings, you put that over the newspaper. That will help rot the paper down, keep it moist, and you're actually improving the soil and creating a moisture-retentive mulch at the same time as you're growing your crops in a weed-free environment. So, but our version is using this stuff because I think we worked it out. The maths was about a strip this long off the big rolls we buy, which are a kilometre long. It costs about £8 for this one strip here, and it increases the yield of crops like leeks, onions and garlic by about 1/3, which is easily 60 quid more crop. So 60 quid minus 8, it's still quids in, as you'd say. So we use that for these kind of crops, and it works really well. Another really important part of this garden, and any garden, would be making sure that we provide materials, organic materials, to improve the soil. So the grounds around Wortley Hall, there's quite a few acres of land around the hall, some of which is formal gardens, the rest of it is woodlands. You can see there's some beautiful big oak trees in the distance there. The trees that are closest to the garden, where there are big paths and driveways, it's all raked up and brought in here. And so we've got material like this here, which is last autumn's leaves. I don't know how many tons are here, but there's a fair old few tons of leaves here. So it's starting to break down already. A bit dry on top because it's been very dry, but further in, crucially, this is moist down here. Without moisture, this won't break down. It needs the moisture to allow the different species of fungus to break the cellulose and lignins that are in this material. So there'll be fungi and slime moulds as well, which specialise in breaking down material like deciduous leaves. And so that's last autumn's pile. We'll come back to that topic in a little while. And then it wouldn't be an organic garden without some muck. So this period since the COVID-19 lockdown has been interesting, and we've had to have staff off at times for self-isolation. We've had to reduce the number of volunteers that we have drastically, although we've always had some volunteers coming to make sure we get crops in and get harvesting, but it just means a lot of work for the people that are coming, and the volunteers that have come have put in an amazing effort. And obviously it's important that we keep on with that. So we haven't managed the manure area or the compost area very well. Normally this would look a lot better than this, honest. So there's a pile of horse manure. Quite a few people around this area in Wortley, between here and Penistone, a lot of people own horses, so they're very happy to donate horse manure. We never pay for anything. It gets dropped off or I go and collect it. And then we always compost it separately from the compost that's made from the trimmings of the crops when we're harvesting, or the weeds that are collected, and the comfrey and nettles that we cut down from areas that we grow those. I do that so I've got sort of choices. I can have different grades of soil conditioner material to feed and improve the soil. And also if there are ever any issues with manure because of maybe the feed wasn't right or something, and I find there's a dodgy batch, which has never happened, but it can happen. I've got them in separate batches. They've all got a number in my notebook, so I keep records of each heap. So if I saw anything happening untoward, I could sort of know where that's come from and stop using it. And also it's relatively weed free because it's horse manure, so just being fed hay, whatever they're eating in the fields as fresh grass and herbal lay. So it's usually fairly weed free, whereas the compost we make will inevitably have weed seed in some of the weeds that get pulled up when we're just doing general weeding and scraping paths, that kind of thing. So that's fine for certain uses and to improve the soil with certain crops, but where we want to be more sensitive about how much weed competition we introduce to an area, or I've got a heavy feeding crop like potatoes or leeks as well actually, I'll use manure. So I've got a pile there that's just a few months old. I've got bags and bags of it to empty out and make new heaps. The current pile we're using here has been here for less time than I'd usually use it, but it's been here about 6 months now. So it's been stacked last autumn. So it's ready to use. I'd like it even more rotted down than that. You can still see there's lots of worms in it at the moment. I don't like the sun, do they? Let's keep them in the shade. You can see, hopefully, there's lots and lots of red brandling compost worms there. Now they're doing the final job of turning this manure into a really fine, humus-rich product, perfect for adding to the soil. Balanced in terms of nutrients, fixed in terms of not being too soluble, so if it rains it doesn't just wash it out of the soil. It will stay fixed to the carbon which is in the bedding, which in this case is mostly a combination of wood chip, fine wood chip, wood shavings, and oilseed rape straw. And that material will also be stacked, some of it will be stacked away for longer than 6 months, for about a year to 2 years, and will be used in propagation purposes, which we'll touch on in a little while as well. We'll mention that later. Over here on the main vegetable garden, as we were looking earlier with the beans and leeks, we've got squash and courgettes. Again, because they are a prostrate plant, they grow close to the ground and they ramble and scramble across the surface of the ground. That creates issues with trying to weed them if it's just bare soil. So what we do is we put this Mypex sheet, the woven polypropylene membrane down. These sheets now have been used every year for about between 10 and 15 years, depending on which sheet we're looking at. Okay, so it's made of oil, because it's a polypropylene, but these sheets have been here, we've used them every season between 10 and 15 years, depending on which sheet it is. And the alternative would be either a very difficult manual labour task in terms of weeding, or in conventional agriculture they would use herbicides, and we don't use those here. Not only are they also a product of the petrochemical industry, they also damage some of the biological activity in the soil, which we're trying to enhance with all the compost and manure. So it's moving the soil backwards. So that's why in organic cultivation you don't use herbicides. But especially in commercial organic horticulture, these kind of materials are very, very popular to mulch the soil to prevent weed competition with the crop. And further along here, we've got another crop crop of beans, but this is another aspect of the work that we do here. So these are Montezuma red beans, which are kept in the Heritage Seed Library, which is at Wrighton Gardens in Coventry. It's like a seed library, and so any seed varieties which show promise or a known, renowned good variety that are no longer licensed to be on sale, and therefore there's no commercial seed company producing it anymore, rather than losing those to extinction, various growers across the country, in fact throughout Europe in fact, keep the old varieties going. Lots of the old varieties have a lot going for them for small scale backyard growing, allotment growing, and for organic cultivation, because they're not expecting to be boosted with agrochemicals either in terms of herbicides or with sort of powerful fertilisers, and they're not hybrids, so they're often a bit more resilient than some of the modern hybrid varieties, which are great if you give them perfect conditions, so almost hermetically sealed up in a polytunnel like commercial growing would be, where there's no insect pests, maybe not even growing in soil, maybe hydroponically grown. These kind of crops can cope with real life conditions in the soil, changes in weather, slight pest and disease attack, they just shrug it off, and you get really interesting crops at the end of it. These produce nice little French beans, which actually really grown to mature on till they dry out. It's the little red beans, like a dark ruby red bean inside, which is really, really lovely to eat. So this is our contribution to that library. Also at the City Farm site in January or February every year, we do a seed swap, and part of what we'll do at that event is bring along some of the harvest of these kind of crops that we're growing here and on our other sites to share and pass on to other growers in Sheffield. They seem to be doing quite well there, because the last time we grew them in a polytunnel. So I'm trying to make sure they don't cross with any other beans. So they should be okay. The other beans are right down there, and beans are self-pollinating, so they don't really need insects. Bees will try and break into the flower, and they want the pollen, they want the nectar, but really beans pollinate themselves, so they should grow on true to type. This area here has had lettuce growing in it, so you can see used up biomulch that can just be pulled up now and put in the compost heap, or buried and it will rot down. We've got successional plantings of lettuce here, so this lettuce here has been harvested from about April through to May until just about the last bit of it's been sort of mid-June. So we've only stopped harvesting from it very recently, because you can see now it's starting to run to flower and the flavour will get bitter and not usable. But our successional plantings are here next to it. More lettuce here that we're beginning to harvest this week. In fact, we started last week with this. And this area here is about to get the same treatment, so it just needs a final clearing off of the weeds, and then we'll lay more of the biomulch, and this will be the third successional planting, which will take us into late summer. And then we'll probably be going back into the polytunnels for overwinter production of lettuces then. And moving over this side of the track, we've got our other compost heaps, and so you can see just over here is where we're chucking any weeds at the moment while we're digging, and any crops that we're harvesting, any of the thinnings off of those, like carrot tops, that kind of thing. We've been harvesting carrots today, so there's fresh carrot tops there. And then some of those lettuce that have finally given up the ghost now, and charred and stuff like that, that's finished with. So, all raw materials, not rotted down yet, a little bit dry, but some of the rain we've had recently will be helping to make sure there's sufficient moisture further in there for the bacteria to begin to break that material down before the fungi start to do their thing. This pile, however, has been here a bit longer. It was turned out of there back in the winter, and so I'm hoping very soon to start using this for the crops that we need to improve soil for, that are going out July, August. So it's just beginning to look for the business. It's got some bean haulm on top, which is just sort of just for a bit of aeration. This will get recomposted again on the top there, but underneath there, that's the compost that looks ready to use. So dig a bit out, that's looking pretty good. There's not so many worms in it now. I think they've done their thing. So your heap starts off like that, starts to get some bacteria working down, the stuff turns a bit slimy and black, and the fungus starts to work through it, and then once it's rotted down a little bit so you can not tell so easily what it's made of, that's when the compost worms will usually start to do their thing. But once they've been through it fully, it's turning into humus. So something crumbly and dark like that can go back on the land. By maturing longer, even better, but that's ready to use now. The longer I leave it, the less lumpy it will be, and that's easier for certain crops to grow in, or if you're going to sow into it. But I'm happy with that. That can get used straight away. And then up here we've got more leaf mould. So 2019 harvest is down there that I showed you earlier. 2018 harvest is down over there, but you just have to believe me, we're not going to try and get the camera over there because Sam will probably trip over something. And then we've got the year before that in these bags here. So this is about 3 years old. And this now, rather than being recognisable tree leaves, it's just a crumbly, beautiful brown material now.
Pop your hands in the sun.
See that better like that?
Lovely.
So that's really crumbly and lovely material now. That's just made for rooting seeds into and seedlings. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail as we go further up the garden, because we'll look at the propagation area and how we use this material and how we combine it with other things to grow all the plants. Then we'll move a bit more swiftly on now. We've got onions here. These went in first week of May. Again, with the biomulch, it means there's very, very little weed competition other than the pathway, which needs clearing soon. But
so how many onions
are doing very well.
do you reckon are in this area here then?
There's about 800 per strip, so there's nearly 4,000 onions in this area. And we've got some Ishikura bunching onions further over there, which you grow as multiples. So mostly these onions are either singles or we're growing them as 2s and 3s in each planting position. That's because if you put them as singles, on the whole they grow too big, and most people don't want a half a kilo onion. So we tend to combine most of them as 2s and 3s, and that way you get roughly 150 to 250, ideally a 200 gram onion, and that's what box schemes and shops mostly want. It's a nice sort of medium-sized onion, so we do it that way. So it's multi-sown onions in cell trays that then get planted out into the holes that we punch through the biomulch, and they're doing really lovely at the moment. That rain that we had recently was just in time, otherwise they would be struggling now. And there's no way we can irrigate here. We haven't got the water supply, sufficient water supply to do that kind of thing. We've got a little avenue here of pear trees. Some of these have been lost when we got here in 2004. They were full of ivy, and the ivy made them very top heavy, so when the wind blew they rocked around, and 2 had already gone. So we replaced those with mulberries, because you can't really put a pear back where a pear's been that long. You get what's sort of called replant or transplant syndrome, and they just don't like it. It's probably something to do with various pathogens that build up in the soil that the tree grows to be completely resistant to, but a young sapling can't be. We've been doing a lot of work on these trees to reduce their height and try and get some revivification, get them back to producing some fruit, because they're very old. They're early Victorian varieties, mostly from Belgium and France. Some are quite rare. The Solet Laboureur, which is a Belgian variety, it's the only example in this part of the country. There's only one other example of it in the north. There might be one example in the south. The rest are all in Belgium and France. It's quite rare. And how old they are, we don't know. But they must go back to early 20th century or late 19th at least. And then up here's the northwest garden, which is why the sun's beaming down from the corner. It's a smaller garden here. Head gardener's house in the distance there. I like that window. obviously was the window where he could look out and check on people if they're working while he's doing very important paperwork. And so here we've got garlic which got planted last autumn. That's ready now. So we're beginning to lift this and pull one out. So that's pretty good garlic there. We've been growing the same strain here so long now and selecting the good ones to replant each year that we now, legally as well as sort of morally or whatever, can call this Wortley garlic. It's our own sort of strain of the thermidrone that we originally bought in 10 years or more ago, probably even longer ago than that. So they're about to get harvested, and then that area will be cleared off, and I think will be a green manure. I think we'll be sowing clover into there, which will grow right for the winter, and that's another aspect of organic growing that we practice here, is growing crops to improve the soil rather than purely for harvesting. So clover, for example, will fix nitrogen. So in the soil, living inside the roots, are rhizobacteria, which are symbiotic bacteria species. They take some nutrients from the plant, they take some nutrients that they need from the plant, which can obviously photosynthesize. The bacteria, though, is quite adept at taking nitrogen from the atmosphere and then working with the plant to fix that as a nitrogen compound in the root system. And then, if you think of any legume, because clovers are legumes, other legumes are things like peas and beans, who have a massive seed, which is very rich in protein. And the proteins are built on having plenty of nitrogen in the molecules. So you need a source of nitrogen to grow big seeded species. So if you can get a bacteria to do some of that collection of nitrogen for the atmosphere rather than just what's in the soil, then you've got an advantage. And so we use that ability of that species, of that family of plants, to improve the soil for us by, rather than buying in nitrogen is in terms of a fertiliser, where they basically use lots of oil in a factory to create pressure to squeeze the air to the point where they can actually fuse the nitrogen into a compound with hydrogen. I think someone might correct me on that, I don't know, I've forgotten now. And then make an ammonia-based nitrogen fertiliser. So we bypass the factory part of it, the human part, and just get nature to do it for us. You know, it works beautifully. And then example here are beans we're growing again just as a green manure. So it might be possible if I dig up a plant now, these haven't been here very long though, that we can see some nitrogen fixation going on. So I'll lift a plant, and maybe you can see it on the screen. Yeah, already these, if you can see what are called nodules on the roots here, is that coming up on the screen sufficient to?
Only just. Yeah. There.
On the roots, you can see sort of white, pinky white, miniature little spheres attached to the roots. That's nitrogen fixation going on there. So that's really good nodulation, because these plants have only been in a few weeks and they're already at work for themselves, but good for us as well. What we have to remember is now that before these plants set beans, we plough it back under, or in a no-dig system we would just sort of hoe them off and leave the tops to die down, and the roots of course would then rot down naturally in the soil anyway. So there it is, the nodulation. We also use overwintering green manures which are capable of lifting any fertility in the soil and banking it to use the following season. And so this crop here is Hungarian grazing rye. This whole area had rye growing on it through the winter. Obviously it's being ploughed under now to grow things like the sweet corn and the beans over there. We've left some for seed because it's expensive to buy the seed and quite hard to get organic seed. You usually have to buy non-organic seed for some reason. So rather than have to do that, we save ourselves a few pennies and we do it this way. We'll harvest this later in the summer. Sometimes we've had school groups come and they quite enjoy threshing it because you can put it on the ground and jump up and down on it. civet, all sorts of things to get the seed out of the ears here. These are, I think these might have flowered already. Yeah, they've flowered, so they're just setting the seed now. So they're kind of ripening the seed from now on. It'll be a little while still before they need harvesting, which is good because we haven't got time at the moment. But that will lift, because it's a grass, it will lift nitrogen and other nutrients from the soil when it's sown in the autumn. So if you get heavy rain through the winter, which would cause some dissolving of nutrients and washing away through the subsoils, this helps to hold it in the green leaf of the plant, and then you just reincorporate it in the spring. So you've held on to some of your fertility rather than having it washed away. And also it covers the soil over, so the soil's not bare. That keeps the soil temperature higher. It gives something for all the different microorganisms in the soil to interact with, and the root system is very fine and fibrous, so it helps hold the soil apart. So when you come to dig it by hand or rotivate it or just put transplants straight into it if you're using a no-dig system, the soil is much more friable, it's more open and easy to use, which is, I mean, a huge difference. Many years ago with some students on one of our other sites, we had 2 patches of soil. One we left bare all winter, one patch we left with rye growing in it, and in the spring we dug both over, and the bit that had been left bare was lumpy and hard and cold. It was a heavy clay soil, which is quite hard anyway to work. But where the rye had been left, it was lovely crumbly soil. So it's a worthy investment, even though you're, buying seed, growing it, looking after it, then you just incorporate it back into the soil rather than eating it. But it does make a huge improvement to the soil. And then up here we've got carrots, well, parsnips and carrots. They're growing under mesh tunnels because the carrot root fly around here is terrible. So to try and avoid the flies getting into the young plants and laying eggs, which then the maggots just eat their way through the roots, we're just leaving them covered up like this to try and prevent that problem happening. And then we've got some beetroot here. We've got successional beetroot. I've got a late crop here, which is going to be a long cylindrical type. Just little seedlings here. I've got main crop here coming along nicely. They were weeded the other week by some volunteers. And then the early beetroot we're harvesting on Monday, and that's these here. And because it was the spring, and sometimes, although not this time, it can be a bit cold and wet in the spring, it's hard to weed, I like to put the early crop through biomulch, because we also, rather than sowing direct in the ground like those ones, these were sown in cell trays and planted out when they were bigger, because it was a bit cold when they were sown. It wouldn't have come up very well outside. So we can easily plant those through biomulch and keep it weed free. Of course, it was very dry spring, so we didn't have that problem, but still, it works in terms of sowing them in a greenhouse and bringing them out later to get an early crop. So these are ready now. So that's a nice sized beetroot. That's not bad for this time of year, Obviously further south than here, they'd have been ready maybe even a month ago. But you've got to remember that Wortley is about 750 feet above sea level, so it's higher than most of Sheffield. So it's a bit cooler here than it is back in the city, and obviously it hasn't got that city sort of warmth to it anyway. That's the difference. Then we have a north-west facing wall. So we've got plums, red currants and morello cherries on this wall. Sour fruits, so they don't need lots of sunshine to ripen, although they actually grow very well on here, because being northwest facing, the west bit means they get afternoon sun, even if they don't get morning sun. So actually they do really well. And then the slip bed in front of the wall is just second early potatoes. So they're doing quite well. They're about to flower. So just beginning to flower now. And then when they've stopped flowering and the leaves are just showing a change in tone from green to paler, going yellow, we can then cut the tops off and lift them. That's a German variety called Nicola, which we find really popular, very disease resistant, very resistant to slug damage, and it stores well as well. So it's quite a creamy, not excessively waxy potato, but it's quite creamy. But we also find that it stores into the winter if we need it to, because we occasionally do farmers market, like the Leather Edge farmers market. It's nice to take things like potatoes to the market with us, so we do hold some things back rather than sell them all at once. We go round the side of the wall into the south garden. Have a quick look round there and go up to the propagation area. So part of the area down here, we've got polytunnels. In the past, this garden had a whole load of greenhouses against the south-east facing wall over there. That's all been sold off many years ago to help fund keeping the hall up and keeping the fabric of the hall together. So we don't have that facility in here, so we've put polytunnels up, which are much cheaper than greenhouses to put up. Been in there enough today, so it's too hot in there. If we do another one of these, we can look in the polytunnels on another occasion. Other part of the south garden is all orchard, pretty much. So we've got mostly apple trees in this top section of the garden, and
Pasture.
yep, the lower rows are all Yorkshire varieties. So Syke House Russet, for example, from what's supposed to be the longest village in England, in Syke House. It's a lovely little russet apple. We've got Charleston Pippin from Charleston, which is sort of between Wakefield and Doncaster. Acklam Russet, all sorts of different Yorkshire varieties. Some are from Whitby, quite a few are from North Yorkshire actually. So we're sort of conserving those here. We've been doing some grafting to make more trees of them as well, and the fruit goes to some of the local shops. On the wall here, which is southeast facing, we've got pear trees, because although in the past they may have grown things like nectarines, peaches on this wall, they'd have had the infrastructure to sort of give them frost protection, like Hessian Sackingdale or something like that. And we're not here enough, we're not living on site like the gardeners would have been in those days. So pear trees are a safe bet because they like a little extra bit of warmth than apples do, and they get this on this wall. And pears are quite vigorous, so it's very easy to use and to fill a 11, 12 foot high wall. And some of these trees have already reached the top and they're gradually filling out over the years. They've been yielding for the last few years. Each tier represents a year of training, so it's a tier a year. So you've got 7 tiers, so they're all at least 7, 8 years old, but they're actually a bit older than that now. And then the slip bed along here, we always grow a crop along here because it's a south-facing border, so great for early crops of whatever it is you put in. So these courgettes are doing really quite well for this altitude. I think the first pick is in a matter of days now on the courgettes. We've got resident goose in the orchard. His job is to keep the grass down, but I think he needs a few friends to do that because I have to go and mow it every so often as well. He's a rare Shetland breed of goose. And we've also got Shetland ducks as well. Quite where they are at the moment, I'm not sure. Maybe they'll pop up further along. And up here we've got a corner where we just grow flowers and herbs. Naturally, we want to encourage wildlife in the garden, especially beneficial insects like hoverflies, lacewings, parasitic wasps. So having areas that are a little bit less looked after with nettles and thistles and all sorts of other, the normal run of weeds you'd expect in this part of the country, they are all exactly what wildlife needs, to feed on and hibernate in. And many of those insects actually help us in terms of protecting our crops from pests. So, lacewings and hoverflies, their larvae is great for eating up aphid, ladybirds, excellent for aphids and mites. Anthochorid beetles are quite good. Say if you've got red spider mite, they might eat some of those as well. Parasitic wasps are excellent for eating caterpillars that might eat your cabbages. So this area is really sort of designed for that kind of thing, a few nice sweet peas and things like that. Also we've got hops growing here, and yesterday we had a swarm of bees from the beehives which are just behind this area, and Nick the beekeeper quite bravely, I think, got up the ladder with this, it's like half width, what do you call that, is that
It's a Langstroth nuke.
a Langstroth nuke, thank you, yeah, that's what it is. So he managed to persuade them physically into the box, because they were hanging out on the top of the hop pole there, and they seem to be okay with that, so he's caught the swarm, otherwise they'd have disappeared into the woods somewhere. Continue up here
See if we
to
can
what
get
used
a
to be
quick
the tennis court.
close up of the entrance.
It needs tidying up here, but you know, we haven't had the people to do it recently, so excuse the mess, but we'll just focus on the good things like the propagation area. So we've got lots of seedlings here. They start off inside here. Obviously, especially in early spring when it's cold, they have to start life in here. This is a quite a new polytunnel. We've clad it on the inside with insulation. It's an agricultural grade bubble wrap in here. That just helps hold heat in overnight. We've got a little gas heater in here as well if we need it. So seeds and seedlings start life in here. We've got the ability to put tents up for extra warmth as well. For things like tomatoes, peppers, aubergines, anything really if it's starting its life in February, March. So we've got Italian flatleaf parsley here, some more basil, some summer savoury to grow as a companion plant to the beans soon, lemon basil, some echinacea that we like to grow, great butterfly plant, and just very attractive big pink flowers. Over here we've got crops that go out within the next few weeks, so spinach, fennel, beetroot leaf. We've got some aubergines here in pots because we've got the room, so last year we grew lots of aubergines. If you're growing organically, commercially, you can't sell food that's been grown in pots, it has to grow in the ground. So these are purely to feed the volunteers, that's all, if we get a crop off them. Yeah, everything that you grow that's called organic when you sell it has to have been harvested from the ground, not from a pot or a tray or a raised bed off the ground. That's not allowed. And we've got raw spinach, swede, kohlrabi. So when I look at all these seedlings, I'm just thinking work because some of the ground out there isn't ready yet, but it will be in time for these. That's part of the job. So that's next thing. That's next week. There's always next week. This is a nice plant which we put in our mixed salad bags that we supply to various customers. This is summer purslane. It's quite a fleshy, succulent plant. Very nice for summertime salads, and it can take the heat a little bit as well. It doesn't grow in the winter, but something a bit different. A fairly mild flavour, but very pleasant mild flavour. And then this is a crop to go in, if not tonight, then tomorrow, which is celery. This will go in the polytunnel. We find on this site, celery finds it a bit cold here as we go from sort of the height of summer now, when it's really warm, into sort of late August, September. It's a bit cool for it, doesn't quite finish right. So I do put aside a whole section of the polytunnel for the celery. And they're about to go in. And then they'll have lots of irrigation lines down for them because they're thirsty things. Celery in the wild is related to, I believe, to a plant called smallage, which grows on sort of riverbanks in estuaries. So it doesn't mind a bit of salt because you've obviously got a bit of salt seawater coming into estuaries. and by the riverbank, so it's very wet. So celery is that kind of plant. If you're going to grow it, it likes it warm, but also it likes it, you know, the soil to never ever be drying out. So that would be the plan with them. Also, I wanted to show you our propagation methods. So hopefully something we made earlier. Yeah, that's good. So that leaf mould I showed you earlier, that was 3 years old. The manure, which if it's been stored a bit longer, like a year and a half, 2 years, we can combine those two materials and you know, put them through a sieve. Can't find a sieve. You know what a sieve is anyway. Put them through a sieve, mix it with a bit of sharp sand, and that is our multi-purpose compost, our growing media for all the seedlings that we raise here. So if you can see that material now, that is 3-year-old leaf mould, 2-year-old manure, put through a riddle, combined half and half usually, and some sharp sand. So we never ever buy in compost, we never buy in plants, we raise everything here. That way we can sort of be a bit more biosecure, which again is something that, because we're growing, you know, semi-commercially, we want to make sure we don't have any problems with our plants. And then, you know, we do sell plants from here as well, so we don't want anyone else having problems from our plants as well. So everything's always disease-free. And I think, you know, the difference is when you buy a commercial growing media from a garden centre or DIY shop or whatever, that material is supposed to be sterile. But of course it's been standing around in bags, sweating somewhere, so it may not actually be sterile. It might have some fungus growing in it anyway, which may or may not attack your seedlings. But if it's sterile, it has nothing in it to protect your seedlings from potential diseases, which can be just airborne anyway. So this material, being organic, it's been sort of homemade, it's full of a natural collection of microorganisms, which includes even things like antibiotic compounds. So when it comes to all the seedlings, they are being protected by that material from diseases. So a common problem people get with raising seedlings themselves is damping off disease, which is a mild fungal infection, but it can kill seedlings. We don't get it here. It just doesn't happen. And I think it's down to not just making sure you have good ventilation and good watering regime, but also having a biologically active growing media. This is the main thing we use for the seedlings that you've seen growing outside with these cell trays. You can get different sizes of these, you can get much smaller trays or cut these in half. It's a really easy way of raising lots and lots of plants. So we just fill these with that compost. We've got special tools to tamp down the compost in the cells. Drinks bottle, so it's firm. So when we pop them out, we can pop them into holes in the ground that we prepared through that biomulch. That works really well. And if we need to grow plants with larger seeds, we'll use larger nodules, so things like these. So I could sow cucumbers or courgettes in something that size, or beans, 9 cells in it. Or if I'm growing something larger, or I'm wanting to make sure I don't have to repot it at all, I'll sow things like squash in these. And I'm making sure that I'm being not overly generous with the compost, because I've only got so much that we're making each time. You know, it takes effort and time to make these materials, because although they're free, it takes labour to actually do them. So we try and make sure we have the appropriate size tray or cell tray or something to actually start them off in. So what happens then is, especially in the spring, early in the spring, March, April, early May, we'll start off in here. We then want to get them ready for planting them outside. We can't just take them from here and plant them in the ground. It's not just that they're warmer in here, they find it shocking to go out in the cold outside. It's that in here They don't experience wind, they don't experience full UV radiation either. Whereas you come outside here, they can now get used to the wind blowing, but because we're in the tennis court up here with the trees and the wall, we get very little wind up here, just a little breeze. That means they can get introduced to the idea of wind without being blasted. And of course we're out in full light, so they get nearly all the light. What they don't get here is later afternoon light, so that means that they can get to cool down before it gets too hot later in the day. So it's a good place to have propagation unit, is somewhere where you get most of the light for most of the day, especially in the morning, so they can warm up from the night, but they're not blasted by all the afternoon, evening sunshine on a day like today. So this is the process of hardening off, and that will also help all the stems that are at ground level to get much firmer and woodier before they go in the ground. Because one of the things that tends to happen this time of year, you raise your seedlings, they're all perfect, ready to go in the ground, you plant them out on a nice day, within a week it rains, and they disappear from slug damage. And that's often because the plants haven't been hardened off enough. If they are hardened off, that stem, that stalk there can be a lot woodier. The slug will not bother with it, it will go and find something else to feed on rather than your nice, firm, UV hardened, battle hardened, wind hardened seedlings. So we don't have fewer slugs than anyone else in this garden with this kind of soil. This is the same sort of clay soil with sandstone layers underneath it that you get for the rest of Sheffield area. So it's plentiful with slugs. But on the whole, we don't get too much damage because we make sure the plants are nice and tough before they go in the ground. So then they might take us a hit, but it doesn't kill the plant, and they grow back from it. Interestingly, there's been research done many years ago, so I don't know how verified it's been, but I've got a bee trying to attack me now. I'm going to move out of here, because we're near the hives now. There's a survey years ago which showed that if a crop takes up to 10% damage, the yield of the plant is actually higher than if it hadn't been touched at all. I think because the plant actually reacts to that attack by thinking, well, I'm going to grow that back and resist that. I think that's part of it. So I don't mind a hit on the crop a little bit, as long as the plants don't die from it. And that's generally what we'll survive through if we get some wet weather like we had recently. Yeah, that's propagation area. And then the tennis court is mostly just very, very old tarmac, so we have put up shipping containers to store equipment and machinery and to store the crops. So, for example, when we've got the apple harvest, we like to store the apples somewhere safe, somewhere cool, somewhere with good ventilation. So this building here is purpose-built for that. There's a shipping container clad with insulation and wood, and it's got little chimneys which suck air from holes at the bottom of the building and then draw it out at the top of the building to take moisture out. And that works very nicely for us. And if it's a hot day like today, anyone that needs it can go in there and just cool off. So I think that's pretty much the end of the tour for this evening.
Okay.
If we get a chance, we'll have a look at something else another time.
Thank you very much, Daryl. So if people want to see more, if you let us know, we haven't covered all of the orchard today, and I think we don't really want to force Daryl into the polytunnels today, so we'll maybe save that for a cooler day. Okay, thanks very much.